Trauma bonding feels like you've broken me into pieces, but you're the only one that can fix me.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like you're continuing to be shattered over and over by this person, but for some reason they're the ones that like hold that glue. They're the only ones that can put it back together, which isn't true. We're going to talk about that's not true. It's just the way it feels. Hi, I'm Kirsten Franklin.
And I am Tiffany Denny.
And we are the Relationship Recovery, and we help people all over the world navigate and heal from relationship turmoil.
Because we have walked it ourselves, we create a unique experience to help you not only heal, but thrive in all areas of your life.
All right, let's get started. All right, welcome back to the Relationship Recovery Podcast. We're excited to be with you. Tiff, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I actually was just answering a question on our Instagram. And if you don't follow us, it's the Relationship Recovery. And I was just looking at it, and this seems to be a consistent theme this week. And I want to see if you've noticed it, but I feel like we keep getting the question, why is it so painful to leave? Why am I struggling to leave? Why am I still attached to this person that's been so horrendous to me or abusive or, whatever other words? Have you noticed that?
I've noticed that. I noticed a couple of questions come in about like how physically painful it is for them to leave. And when they go back, they get this like sense of relief. And so it feels better to stay, even though it's bad. I've noticed a couple of those questions come through as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally like an addiction.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious. I mean, if you out there listening to this is something that you notice, leave it in the comments. I mean, tell us your story. Tell us what you're physically reacting to. And if you are feeling this way, I think you'll actually really like what we're going to talk about today. Because I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about what a trauma bond is. Because, I mean, that's essentially what they're describing, don't you think?
Right. Oh, absolutely. 100% for sure.
So let's just jump in. Let's just talk about it. What is a trauma bond?
So, a trauma bond, it happens when that abuser really provides that survivor with like these little rewards and then punishments. And it creates this type of psychological conditioning. The other thing it does is it creates a cycle and a pattern of hope, for that next reward and then a reprieve from suffering. So like what I was talking about earlier on when I was looking at those questions, and somebody had commented that, it just feels like they're physically breaking. But then when they go back, they just get this sense of just relief from that suffering. And it feels better to have that relief. So it's like a drug. They have studies on this, and they know that, when you go back, it's almost like a fix, like if you're going back for a drug.
And they actually say it's similar to Stockholm, right?
Yeah, they do. They say it's similar to Stockholm. So I always remember, and you're probably way too young for this, Kirsten, but I always remember the movie Savannah Smiles. So those that are in my generation will know exactly what I'm talking about. But she forms, that you almost have empathy for the person that is abusing you or has kidnapped you, or you become attached to that person because that's kind of your survival. So it is definitely like Stockholm Syndrome. Somebody once said this, I thought this was interesting, but trauma bonding feels like you've broken me into pieces, but you're the only one that can fix me. I thought that was powerful.
I mean, if you've ever experienced this at all, I mean, Tiffany and I both have walked through this. So many of our clients, so many of the people that we talk to every day, a lot. I mean, that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like you're continuing to be shattered over and over by this person, but for some reason they're the ones that like hold that glue. They're the only ones that can put it back together, which isn't true. We're going to talk about that's not true. It's just the way it feels. Yeah. I mean, that's the only reason you'd go back. Right. If it didn't create that.
Right. Exactly. And, it kind of what it looks like is to break a trauma bond or to get out of a trauma bond. It takes about 18 months to 3 years. And that's with getting the proper help to do that. So it's a big deal. I think, we often hear, people say, my loved one keeps going back. They keep going back. But, part of that trauma bonding and that abuse cycle, really, it can take somebody up to 7 times to really get out of that type of relationship. So if you find yourself in that relationship and you've gone back and forth, please don't shame yourself. It happens in time. I mean, I get asked all of the time, if your relationship was that bad, why did you stay for that long? And the answer to that is it's really complicated. And if you've never walked it, you don't understand it. So, if for those of you that are listening and are in that situation, please don't shame yourself over it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a hard thing to understand unless you've walked through it. It's going to be a hard thing for future people in your life to understand unless you've walked through it. So just give yourself that grace. I second that completely. I mean, there was a point where you just want to surrender. I just remember that feeling of just like, in fact, I think I remember in my relationship, I was as far out as I had ever been. And I remember making the phone call, almost pleading, even though I wasn't actually the one that had done anything wrong in the relationship. And I remember like actually pleading to go back because I could feel that turmoil. I could feel that pain. I could feel that, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm literally pulling myself away from the only thing that makes me feel better. But it's also the thing that makes me feel the very worst. But you're just not in that mindset. You're just only in that mindset of, I need to get back to where it was.
Exactly. I think just to demonstrate how powerful these are, both Kirsten and I, we've done our own forms of healing and a ton of it. And we continue because healing is a process. It's a process. It's a journey. There's not a destination to it. We just constantly are healing, right? But I really feel like, every once in a while I get a stark reminder that how that trauma bond still kind of can affect me. And I have the tools, I have the resources now to be able to just quickly correct that and shift my mindset. But it's still there. That's how powerful it is. And it's been years and years and years. So just pointing that out, and that's really important that we give ourselves some grace around that because it is such a big deal.
Absolutely. The other part I want to add, Tiffany kind of mentioned earlier, that timeline, how long it can take to actually get out of the trauma bond. Do not put a time constraint on yourself. I mean, that is just a number that's been thrown out there. And that's with healing, like that's with support. That's either with coaching, that's with therapy, that's with additional support, right? But everyone is different. Tiffany's does not look the same as mine. Yours doesn't look the same as mine, right? So give yourself that grace of knowing that healing is, like Tiffany said, is not a destination, right? It's a journey. It's so important to understand that, especially with a trauma bond. It's going to look like a roller coaster. You're going to go up, down. There's going to be curves. There's going to be upside downs and things like that. And as long as you're not stuck upside down, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through. You're going to make it through. It's going to be tough, but you can make it through. All right. Now that we kind of know what a trauma bond is, what it looks like, what you're experiencing, let's talk about 4 questions you can use to determine how far along you are in breaking a trauma bond. So if you feel like a trauma bond is what you're experiencing, if you feel that pain, that need to go back to the person, you've broken up, you've divorced them, whatever it may be, and you're feeling that draw to go back, or maybe you're still in the relationship and you can't quite leave, these questions are for you. And there's a free download to these questions. They'll be in the show notes. So you can actually go to the link. You can download this yourself. So don't feel like you need to go grab a pen and paper. If you have a pen and paper, great, fantastic. But if not, there will be an opportunity for you to do that. So the first question is do you feel like you are staying present? Are you constantly focusing on whether or not you should contact them? Are you constantly agonizing over what they are doing? Do you struggle to focus on what's happening in real time? Are you focusing on what has happened in the past? Right? Focusing so much on your toxic ex will keep you in that trauma bond. So if you're still thinking about the nostalgia or the good times. Try focusing on what's happening right now, not in the past or the future, but right now. So one of our favorite practices, and Tiffany and I use this all the time, we use it as part of our container, but really, you guys, our 5 senses are so powerful. It's one of the quickest ways to get present is by using your 5 senses. So look around you in your actual like actually where you are. In fact, I would love if you did this practice right now. Use your 5 senses and either write down or just say it out loud what you notice using your 5 senses. Maybe it's like, I hear my kids in the background. I can smell dinner cooking. I can hear Kirsten and Tiffany chatting. You get it. What do you see? What do you physically feel? I feel my sweater. I see my phone because I'm listening to this podcast, whatever it may be. But use those 5 senses to really bring you back and focus in there. Tiff, what are some of your favorite practices for staying present?
So I'm big on the anchors and the 5 senses, and we teach those all the time to our clients. But the thing that, if you don't know us very well, we do not teach anything that we don't practice. It's really important to us that we are really being, completely transparent with what we're teaching people. When we teach anchors, and I use my anchors, sometimes I do that to help myself keep present. One thing I notice, like when I'm starting to feel grief, especially, I lost my dad a little over a year ago, and Kirsten actually kind of taught me this one because she does it, with a different version. But I have a necklace that has my birth flower on it, my dad's birth flower on it, and I'll find myself rubbing it. And that just like brings me back to the present, right? For me, smell is a big issue, and lavender is a big one. So either, lavender oil or burning a candle or whatever it takes, but it just takes my anxiety and it calms it down and I stay present. Those are a couple of my favorite ones and my go-tos. And yeah, I would encourage anybody to use those 5 senses to come up with your anchors so that you can stay more present, because when you are trauma bonded to somebody, they rent all the real estate in your head. Basically, that's just so all consuming. And so just, choose those anchors so that when you feel like that's all you're doing is listening to their words and worrying about what they're doing, all those kind of things, you can pick an anchor and, pull yourself back into the present so that you can actually, move forward in your progress. Otherwise, we just stay really stuck.
So true. I mean, you've got to have those. So another idea, just since you brought up the anchors, find an anchor specific. And when we're talking about anchors, like Tiffany said, the necklace, if you guys are watching on YouTube, I'm literally holding the necklace that I use. That's one of them. You could find, if necklaces aren't your thing, you could find a stone. Like I have a stone on my desk I use all the time. Like while I'm coaching, I will literally grab the stone to help myself stay present. I mean, these are tools you guys can use. You can use anything, but maybe find an anchor or a reminder or a token, whichever word you want to use, that's going to be, this is anytime I'm being sucked into that trauma bond, anytime I'm longing to go back to that person, I'm going to use this to bring myself present and remind myself of how far I've come and how great I feel now and how this is for my good.
Okay, the next question is, what is the reality of the circumstance? So ask yourself that. Is the other person getting help? More than likely not, but if they are, then maybe that is going to be something that can be worked on. Do you see changes if you still have to be in contact with them for custody reasons, etc.? Stay focused on what's happening in real time versus what they claim will happen. Mm-hmm. Also, if you have not done this, recall experiences that happened that are evidence of abuse or toxicity, and write down those experiences or print off texts. We call this the Book of Truths. We're really big about this. Basically, what it is you can take a notebook, and because you'll find that as we're talking through some of these subjects as we go forward, a lot of things intertwine with each other, right? So when there's a trauma bond, there's also gaslighting involved, right? So the Book of Truths is a really good place to put conversations down, to like physically write them down, to print off text, attach them inside the notebook. I just keep everything in one place, because what it does is it allows you to be able to go back and know what your truth is. Because if you're familiar with gaslighting, it's really a tactic that's put into place to keep you confused and keep you not living in reality, right? So so if you can have a place that you can go back and look at those, then you know what that conversation is and what the truth is. And it helps kind of keep you feeling a little bit more grounded. It's also a place that you can go back and see how far you've come. But in the moment, that book of truths will be a lifesaver to you. And, you know, if you have to go to court, it's also a good place that you have record that you can give to your attorney and say, these are the things that are happening. So it serves, you know, three really good purposes. So I would encourage anybody listening to keep your own book of truths.
No, and I love the Book of Truths. It's helped so many of our clients in multiple different ways, like Tiffany said, whether it's a court, whether it's just a reminder for this trauma bond of what's actually happened. Because like we talked about before, is you get nostalgic, right? You start being like, oh, things maybe weren't so bad. Oh, yeah, there was a time where, you know, their fist was through the wall, right? There was a time where things like that happened, but now you can remember that. Versus only thinking of the sliver of good, you can remember all the things that actually did happen.
Absolutely.
Tiffany, earlier you had mentioned custody, right? I mean, it's almost impossible. I mean, it feels like it would be almost impossible to break a trauma bond when you're having to deal with somebody you're sharing custody with your kids. That's not the case. I mean, there are options. You can go as close to no contact as possible. You can do parallel parenting. You can do things like we're only texting, we're only talking about the kids. There's boundaries to be made. And I'm sure over the time that this podcast exists, also on our social media, we have more information about these type of things. So again, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram, or we have resources on the relationshiprecovery.com. I'm sure we'll do an episode about it. But just know, if you have to share custody, there is still hope. You can break that trauma bond. You can get out of the relationship. We've seen it with clients. We've seen it with ourselves. I mean, Tiffany and I both have had experienced this where we had to share custody, and there are ways to do that. All right, number 3. Are you practicing positive self-talk and breaking shame cycles? So typically after being verbally abused or gaslit for so long, it can become confusing what's true and what isn't. Again, why Tiffany mentioned, you know, the Book of Truths, why it's so important. So if your ex-partner was telling you over and over how worthless you were, odds are you may have adopted that, right? So a sign that the trauma bond is still really strong is their narrative is still very much prevalent in your brain. So changing that narrative is crucial. Another version we see is getting stuck in that shame cycle of I should have known better. I could have done better. I should have done this and they would want to be with me. I should have done this with myself so that I wouldn't be hurting right now. It can look all sorts of different ways, right? We know what the shame cycle looks like.
Yeah. The shame cycle was big for me, and it came in the form of, how did somebody like me get in that situation? How did that happen?
Oh, me too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm educated, I'm smart, I should know, right? And yeah, it's a big one. So yeah.
And so many of our clients, by the way, I remember, I'm just going to throw this in here because it just seems like a good place. I remember I had met a woman. I'm in the sauna. I'm at the gym. And she's like, well, what do you do for a living? And I was like, well, I'm the co-founder of a company called the Relationship Recovery. And she's like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, well, typically I work with people that have been through relationship turmoil or trauma or abuse, or, you know, explaining what the relationship recovery is. And she says to me, which, mind you, she didn't realize who she was speaking to. I mean, if I'm the co-founder, there's the odds are I'm pretty passionate about it, or I've walked through it myself. But she says, oh my gosh, you must deal with a lot of weak women. Well, first off, I don't just deal with women. We deal with people of all genders and anyone that identify, you know, whatever you identify with. If you can be in a relationship, which is every human, you can work with us. Second off, this person No, these are not weak people. In fact, I would say most of our clients are amazing.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
so educated, because we're the ones that would deal with it. You
Yep.
know what I mean? We're the ones with the capabilities to handle and deal. It just causes us turmoil,
Yeah.
right? Oh, anyways.
Yeah.
It's just, so my point being is, if you're in this spot, you probably are strong and powerful and amazing in other areas of your life too. And just because you've had this relationship doesn't mean that you can't be strong and amazing in relationships either. But my point being is, that's probably why you're susceptible, is because you are so badass.
Yeah. And abuse doesn't discriminate. It
No.
doesn't pick and choose people. It happens to everybody that gets in that situation, right? Anybody is, they can get into that situation of being abused. It doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah. Number 4, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Are you practicing self-care? If so, how? So taking care of yourself, the thing about it is that it's going to help relieve some stress. It's going to reduce the desire to turn to the abusive person for comfort. And some of those ways that we suggest are, journaling, meditation, exercise, hobbies, prayer, or talking to trusted friends. And I think the key there is trusted friends.
Yeah, let's underline that
Yeah,
in your notes.
yeah, because here's the deal. That you may relate to this, but if you talk to somebody that doesn't understand this, you get zero validation. You get looked at like you're crazy or that you're the problem. It's so crucial that you speak with people that understand it. It's just a must.
And even if they don't completely understand,
Yeah.
sorry, Tiff,
No,
even if they don't completely understand, talk to somebody that understands empathy, maybe somebody that has good boundaries, maybe that's somebody that's just safe and allows you the space to vent without judgment. They don't have to be somebody that's actually walked through it. If you need somebody that's walked through it, we're here. We're here at the Relationship Recovery,
yeah,
right? You can sign up, talk to us on the discovery call. We're happy to talk to you. But just know you can talk to your loved ones. Just make sure you're aware of how they handle things, right?
yeah. Kirsten, do you want to talk about gratitude a little bit?
Yes. Okay. Gratitude, guys. I mean, it might be like a broken record. You might see it a lot in social, whatever. Gratitude is so popular because it works. It's the fastest way to take care of yourself. It's the fastest way to change your mood. It's the fastest way to keep things going. Okay. So just doing small things like saying a gratitude out loud is one of my go-tos. Or I've loved Mel Robbins. She did that whole high five in the mirror thing. I think that's awesome too. And just saying a gratitude at the same time. Adding like a physical practice to it can be awesome. So like writing, the high five thing, maybe you're tapping. If you're watching us on YouTube, showing a little tapping here. We love to do that. It's called bilateral butterfly tapping. If you can't see, if you're not watching on social, you're listening to this. If you go to our Instagram on our reels, it's our very first reel. We're actually showing the butterfly tapping practice. So powerful. Gratitude's amazing. It's amazing self-care. It really is.
Yeah. And one thing though, when we're, talking about self-care is if we get really caught up in making our self-care perfect, it becomes no longer positive. And like having the perfect candle and the perfect yoga practice and the perfect setup. You see on Instagram a lot of these people that, show their areas in their home that are perfect. You don't need that to practice self-care. And like I said, when you get to that place where it looks like that, then it's no longer self-care and it becomes toxic self-care. So just kind of be aware of that. Keep it really simple.
Yeah. Toxic self-care, toxic positivity, they're real things, right? Be aware. I love that.
Yeah.
So if you think you're experiencing a trauma bond, even if you're not sure if you're experiencing a trauma bond, but you just know, I feel awful. This relationship has just taken it out of me. I'm in the relationship. I'm out of the relationship. I'm getting divorced. I've been divorced. It's been 10 years and I still feel this pull. Whatever it is, you don't have to do this alone. Okay. You don't have to walk this alone. We have lots of resources here at the Relationship Recovery. And, you have to find the modality that works for you. Like Tiffany said, that timeline she gave earlier was based on getting help. Trauma bond's no joke. I mean, it literally changes your brain the same way that a drug addiction does, right? You can do the research, you can go, read the studies. They show those same kind of chemicals kicking. So it's important. And it doesn't have to look the same for everyone. It might look like coaching. It might look like therapy. It might look like reading. It might look like meditation. I mean, there's so many different things. But if you're not sure where to start, we're here. And you can book a discovery call with us on the relationshiprecovery.com. You can message us on Instagram and just say, hey, what do you think? And then we'll make the best recommendation for you of whatever resource that we have, right? And again, if you miss those questions or if you're like driving or whatever, the download's available in the show notes. So you can go back and see if this is something that really resonates. All right. Just like every week, we love to hear from our community. We love to answer your questions. We love to do coaching here on the podcast and just about anywhere. So we're going to get into those questions around trauma bonds. And if you're not sure how to ask your question, you can email us at hello@therelationshiprecovery.com and just mention podcast in the subject line, or you can actually go onto our Instagram. That's typically where we will ask questions, just in our Instagram story, and you can submit your question depending on the topic of the week. So here's one. Tiffany, if you want to take this one. Is a trauma bond formed by two people sharing about past traumas they've experienced?
So the answer to that is trauma bonding is really often misunderstood as a bond between two or more people who experience the same traumatic event or other traumatic events. But that's not really what trauma bonding is. It's more of this psychological response to abuse, where that abuse person forms an unhealthy bond to the abuser. And like we used that example before of Stockholm syndrome, and it's when, somebody gets, kidnapped or whatever, and then they form this sympathy and this affection for their abuser, and then that hinders them from seeing the severity of their situation. So that's really more of what that looks like. I've heard this before, and so I think sometimes it seems like that would be logical, but really we're talking about the abuse cycle when we're talking about trauma bonding.
Exactly. Typically the two people that are in, I can see where the confusion comes up, just because typically the people that are in there, if you're dealing with somebody that's causing abuse, we can make it really gray, but I love that you kept it simple.
Okay, the next question is, why am I still in a trauma bond after he's been out of my life for a year?
It's just like we mentioned earlier, it can take 18 months to 3 years to break a trauma bond, and that's with help. So if this is your question, or if you relate to this question, are you seeking help? Do you have intervention? If the answer is yes, it may just not be your time. It may just be that you still have things to work through, or maybe it's time to change what intervention you're using. Maybe a different technique would work better for you. Maybe there's some trauma behind that you're missing. And, we talk a lot about normalizing trauma. There might be something you're missing behind that. And once you connect to that, why you're still holding on to that trauma bond so tightly, it might release. There's so many different answers to that, but that would be what I would add.
Yeah, I love that. I think that was well said.
All right. And our last question is, why does it hurt physically to break a trauma bond?
So if you remember what we talked about earlier on about that addiction and that chemical response. So it's just like you're addicted to a drug, but you're addicted to a person. So that detox that happens very similar to what it looks like when you detox from a drug. And that's why it's so powerful. And that's why it is so very important to, get some help, to talk to people that have experienced it before so that they can kind of help you through this.
Love that. I agree. Couldn't say it better. Give yourself that grace, though. If it was somebody, put yourself in the same spot as somebody that has an addiction. think of yourself that way, you would give them that time, right? I mean, it's normal for someone with an addiction to go to rehab. We don't have that same, and I hate to call it a luxury because I don't think it should be a luxury. And rehab's not a luxury by any means. So I'm not saying that. But my point being is there should be better resources. It should be more well known. But that's why this podcast exists. That's why the relationship recovery exists. That's why all of you just need to normalize these things are happening, because I promise you, 50% of us will get divorced, if not more than that at this point, depending on where you are. So many, and by the way, most of the people we talk to, these relationships are not just, what people assume divorce looks like. I feel like it's getting more rare for turmoil not to exist in a relationship ending. And maybe we're a little biased on our end because that's typically who's attracted to us, because that's what we talk about. But it does seem like most relationships end with some turmoil and some trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so we really need to normalize and talk about these things. It's not just, I think sometimes we get into this fantasy of what a relationship looks like after too. It's not just a fantasy in the relationship, but almost this fantasy of what co-parenting looks like and relationships look like, and those type of things. And it makes it so people have a really hard time dealing with things like trauma bonds because they think they're wrong, they're broken, there's something wrong with them. I should be over this by now. Why am I still struggling? And I assure you, most people are still struggling. It's hard.
Sometimes we're so ashamed that we were in that situation, or that we are in that situation. We don't talk about it, right? We keep it all in here. We make our lives look perfect to the outside world, but really inside we're just, falling to pieces. So that's another thing too that I think we've got to be careful about, is, really making sure that we're speaking up, and that, knowing that you're not the only one that's gone through it, and that there are support systems out there for you.
Love it. It's a great way to end this week's podcast. Again, there's resources in the show notes. You can get more at therelationshiprecovery.com, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening.
Don't forget to leave us a review.
For more relationship recovery tips and tools, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and all things social media at The Relationship Recovery.
You can also watch highlights of the show over on YouTube.
If you feel like our podcast is speaking to you, check out our coaching services, courses, bundles, and more at therelationshiprecovery.com.
We'll see you next week.